Hi, everyone. I'm Errin Haines, editor-at-large for The 19th, an independent nonprofit newsroom that aims to empower you with the information, resources, and community that you need to be equal participants in our democracy. Before Black History Month comes to an end, and as we head into the President's first State of the Union address, we're excited to bring you this conversation that I hosted with two Black women leading federal policy on critical issues for the nation. Cecilia Rouse is chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, and Brenda Mallory is chair on the Council on Environmental Quality. They are both historic firsts in their roles. Welcome, Chair Rouse and Chair Mallory, and thank you so much for helping us to close out Black History Month and to preview the President's State of the Union address next week. I'm really interested to talk to both of you about your roles and what the policies that you are helping to create in the administration are really going to directly impact so many of the folks that are tuning in for this conversation. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, let's get started. I want to start by asking both of you really kind of what can we expect to hear on the economy and on climate from President Biden in his first State of the Union address next week. We can start with you, Chair Mallory.
Great. Well, thank you so much again. I think that, we have been previewing somewhat some of what the president is likely to say just in talking about the year of accomplishments and how much that we have achieved in this first year, in terms of both job growth and in the growth in the economy that's occurred so far, and the expectation that we are on a path where that will continue. So I think the president will continue to highlight the successes that we've seen, but at the same time recognize that we have work to do that will continue in this area.
Great. Chair Rouse, what would you add to that?
I think the State of the Union is very much in flux.
Yeah.
The State of the Union is the president's opportunity to absolutely talk about his accomplishments, which have been many on the economic front. And I'm happy to talk about those. He'll talk about how, that we've had the strongest economic growth in nearly 40 years. Household balance sheets are strong. We recognize that there's inflation and he feels that and understands that. He's very focused on it. That is why it's so very important that Congress pass the remaining components of his economic policy, which are really addressed at lowering costs for families by making investments in people and families, lowering costs of childcare, education, prescription drugs. And many of these actually help expand economic capacity by both improving, labor productivity, that's our technical term, by helping people become more skilled so they can take more skilled jobs, but also making it easier for people to join the labor force. But, it's going to be within a context, and the events that are unfolding between Russia and Ukraine will have impact on the economic, on the economic context as well. The president will be laser focused on that. His sole job and focus is to ensure that this economy is working for all Americans, and that it's working for the middle class, and that's ensuring that we've got a good, strong, robust economy.
Well, you brought up a lot that I want to unpack there, Chair Rouse, on the economy and where we go from here. But, you did bring up the conflict in Ukraine, and I think it really is important for Americans to understand that there is a potential economic impact, especially, particularly for Americans who may not realize the impact that what is happening with events over there could have over here. Are you able to kind of speak to that or explain to people what that impact could be, what some of the things that you all are thinking about, that the administration is thinking about, that you're discussing with the president about that potential impact?
Yes, so the president's response, and he's been very forceful, he's going to speak in just a few minutes. He's put together a package of economic sanctions. We know these sanctions have been designed to be most impactful on the Russian economy and to minimize the potential impact on the US economy. Russia is not a major trading partner of the US. However, a major source of our increasing prices is the price of gasoline. And so we are watching and we are paying attention to what this does to the price of gasoline in particular. Again, the president is prepared to use all tools at his disposal to address the increasing, to address the gasoline challenges right now. But that is something that we are watching.
Yeah. Well, you also brought up Build Back Better. And so I want to talk about the future of that legislation and kind of where we go from here, as prospects for passing the legislation are still very much an open question. Without that legislation, Chair Rouse, how does the administration plan to deliver on its commitment to building the care infrastructure that I know he discussed when announcing this proposal? But that's something that is still very much in question as we try to figure out the future of what's going to happen with this.
Yeah, an excellent question. Look, Build Back Better is a package of initiatives that the president is committed to, and I will say as an economist, are so very important for ensuring the sustainable long run growth that this economy needs, and to help ensure that that growth is more equitably shared. The president, in terms of the Build Back Better component, that's under the technical term, under reconciliation, the president is working with Congress, is looking forward to working with Congress to get the most robust package passed as possible. But that does not mean that those pieces that may not make it into that package, or if the package doesn't even materialize as a package, the president will fight for the individual components because they're also very important. So you brought up the care economy. We know on the one side, we know that children of color are less likely to be in high quality pre-K, high quality childcare, because it is so very expensive for families. And so he's committed to ensuring a greater access to affordable, high quality childcare for all children, whether that's through childcare or pre-K. The children who are in a high quality setting as youngsters go on to, they have an easier time in school, they have higher test scores in school, they're less likely to drop out of high school, they're less likely to commit criminal acts. It's a really fabulous investment in our future. It also means the care economy. We know, as you alluded to, that care workers are disproportionately women of color, and yet the pay is very low. And so as part of his commitment to the care economy, it is ensuring that our care workers are paid at least a minimum wage, that they have better compensation, better quality employment conditions, because we know that the better compensation that those care workers receive, the better care they provide. It's when you don't have to string together 2, 3, 4 jobs in order to pay the bills, you can provide better quality care to those you are taking care of. So he is committed to seeing these components passed, whether it's through something called Build Back Better, or whether it's individually, but they are important components to his economic policy.
Chair Mallory, with Build Back Better stalling, though, major climate initiatives are also stalled. And so I want to ask you, what is the future of those efforts, and how is the administration really working to move the country away from a reliance on fossil fuels and use more environmentally friendly technologies? What is the president going to tell the American people on Tuesday night about the threat of climate change and what the administration is doing?
Well, so I would say, Errin, one thing that is very consistent in what Chair Rouse just said in terms of its implications for climate change is the notion that the president has identified an agenda that he believes will make it successful to meet the challenges that we're facing in this country under climate as well as other things. And the Build Back Better is a tool to get there. And I think that what the president has been very clear about all along is this is a mechanism that we think is the best way to try to achieve the reductions that are necessary, to the investments that are necessary through this legislative action. If that doesn't work, we're going to be thinking about and looking at and trying to approach some of these issues in a different way. We're not at the point of saying Plan B, because I think there still is some hope and that Plan A works out in a way that still achieves the benefits that we're aiming for. But I think that in terms of the fact that climate change is the existential crisis of the moment, the president has said that many times, and that we have to, as quickly as possible, as fast as possible, do the things that are necessary to make the investments, to address the decarbonization, and to build back that economy that we think will be important in transitioning us to a clean energy environment.
Well, thank you for that. Chair Rouse, I want to come to you to talk, just about some other policy priorities that a lot of our audience is interested in. One thing I want to ask about is student loan debt, because we know that that falls disproportionately on Black women. And I know that Education Secretary Miguel Cardona is leading the work on addressing this, but I just really wanted to ask you if and how you might also be weighing in on this issue. Can you share any updates about the administration's plan to ease this burden for Americans who are struggling with this issue?
Well, absolutely. The president understands, and we all understand the very high levels of student loan debt that many students are struggling with. The president has actually already addressed the debt of more students than any other president in what I would consider doing good housekeeping, which is, the borrower defense, utilizing borrower defense to cancel the debt of students who are defrauded by for-profit companies, making the public sector loan forgiveness program work better, and efforts continue on those fronts. Looking for ways to make the direct IDR, so the income-driven repayment system, work more effectively and be a more appealing option and more cost-effective option, really economic option for more borrowers. So the president is very focused on trying to improve the student loan system. I will tell you, as an economist who studies higher education, I believe student loans have a place in our student loan portfolio. They also benefit so many students. So many students are able to go to college, pursue a kind of post-secondary education they otherwise would not be able to afford to do so. And the vast majority are able to repay their loans in a manageable manner. Yet we know that many students have taken out loans which have become a burden, and it's really important that we have a system that does the job it needs to do without becoming a burden at the same time.
Yeah. Just sticking with, a conversation around women of color and the economy, we know that they have consistently lagged behind, and some would even say they're being left behind in this economic recovery. I wonder if you can just talk a little bit about helping us understand why that is. I mean, why aren't policies equalizing the recovery at a faster clip? And do you think that the policies that are being put into place now will really help equalize the situation in the long term? And if so, how long term are we talking about?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I think we may be missing that women of color have, there are huge problems. So I don't want to color code this, but you mentioned the pandemic itself.
Yes.
And let's go back. So the unemployment rate for Black women reached a high of 16.6% in May of 2020. And that has now fallen to 5.8% at the last print. So there actually has been a fairly rapid decrease in the unemployment rate for Black women. And so the improvement over the course of this downturn is much faster, much faster than it was, say, coming out of the Great Recession. So we've actually seen a rebound, and I think it's important not to lose sight of that. That said, we know that there are structural differences, and that's the legacy of discrimination, the burden of childcare, and all of the other struggles that we know exist in our community that predate the pandemic and that we know we have to address going forward. One of the aspects of President Biden's economic agenda is a whole of government approach to dealing with issues of race and equity, and his understanding that kind of discrimination and those kinds of gaps actually provides a headwind and prevents us from reaching our full economic potential. And so we want to be trying to reduce those kinds of barriers. So I mentioned, for example, improving the pay of care workers. That will go a long way towards bettering the labor force situation of many women. Investments in human capital. So human capital are the skills and health and things that people bring when they take a job. So post-secondary education, even the American Rescue Plan had big investments in our post-secondary institutions, including historically Black colleges and universities, tribal colleges and universities, and minority serving institutions. So those kinds of investments, they don't pay off right away, but they help people get skills that help them get a better job. When I think about the child tax credit, we know that the expansions that existed under the American Rescue Plan decreased child poverty by somewhat 40%. And those kinds of investments, most parents were putting that money towards their children. And so we know from other kinds of policies like that, that when we ease the poverty rate for young children, again, that's like an investment in their future. They go on, they have an easier time in school, they become more productive adults. They just have better outcomes as well. So the president's policies have already been focused on our community. He would continue to do so. Again, I will just emphasize that many components of Build Back Better would disproportionately impact our community. I want to make a plug actually for something that's even in the bipartisan infrastructure law, which is the remediation of lead pipes. So this is an underappreciated investment in that law. But lead, any level of lead in children's systems is detrimental. And we know that children, African American, Hispanic children, are more likely to have more toxic levels of lead. And researchers have demonstrated in numerous instances when policies are put in place that remove lead from pipes and from paint, that the test scores of children increase almost overnight, and they go on to have better outcomes as adults as well. So all of these are investments in our future. Again, they may not happen overnight. The child tax credit put money in pockets right away, but other parts of his agenda are really fabulous investments in our communities.
Okay, well, you bring up the child tax credit, and obviously that was something that was transformative for so many families. We certainly wrote about that here at the 19th, but with that going away, I mean, the impact of that going away, I just wonder if you can speak to that and kind of where the administration can go from here to continue to provide that kind of help that people really did feel very directly and very immediately.
Well, there is a version of the child tax credit which does exist. It's not as generous as that existed under the American Rescue Plan. It's smaller, and importantly, if you don't have tax liabilities, you can't access it. It's not refundable. But I will note that first of all, many families are still eligible and will receive another tranche of their child tax credit. The part that was paid monthly was only half of what they were due. So in April, they will receive another tranche of the child tax credit. But I will say that this is one of the president's priorities. We understand just how important it is as part of our child investment strategy, which again, I'm just going to say is part of our economic strategy. We know just how important it is, and we are working with Congress to try to pass a version of the child tax credit that is more generous than that exists today.
Okay, well, thank you for that update and that insight. Chair Mallory, I'm going to come back to you because we know that energy development has disproportionately hurt communities of color. You got projects developed and placed in their backyards without their consent. Can you talk about how CEQ is and is planning to work with communities that are really on the front lines to ensure that transition to clean energy doesn't repeat the same harmful frameworks and really includes community input from the beginning?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that as you can hear in the theme, just in listening to Chair Rouse, is the president and the vice president have really prioritized considerations of equity and environmental justice in all of the work that we're doing across the board. And I will say on energy development and any kind of development, really, in order to be successful in integrating equity into the policy analysis, you have to be very intentional about it. And from day one, you can see that the president has been putting in place people and policies and approach and structures that are designed to make sure that the voices of communities of color are reflected, are embedded in the discussions, in the decision making, in the work that we're doing to avoid the problems exactly that you described. So, for example, the first White House Environmental Justice Senior Director was created during the president's administration because he wanted to have someone in the White House who played that critical role on making sure that voices were present. The first White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council was created, which is made up of 26 experts from all across the country who have lived in, worked with environmental justice communities throughout their careers, and they are bringing the voices into the government and working with another body called the White House Environmental Interagency Council, which is to make sure that those voices then reach the people who are making the policies and adopting the approaches that have had negative impacts. So all of these are tools to keep in place and to make sure that we are focused on how we make a difference and do something that has not been done before as it relates to communities of color.
Yeah, and you also, I mean, you bring up, having those stakeholders in the room. We know that women of color are leading the grassroots efforts to really address pollution, the impacts of climate change, disaster response in their communities. They've been doing that for decades. But these locally led, community engaged efforts have lacked financial support just due to barriers in applying for federal and private funding and grants. How are you engaging, or how are you planning to engage with these stakeholders in your role and really support their work in fighting the climate crisis? What are the actual steps that you've already taken or that you're planning to take?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, one of the benefits of actually bringing those folks into the room, into that advisory council that I referenced, is exactly to be able to answer those questions on what's going to help most. So of the 26 members of the council, at least 14 are women of color or members of tribes, who are exactly as you just said, are folks who have been on the front lines for decades fighting these issues. And part of what they bring into the room is an understanding of what are the challenges when it comes to some of the grant funding that communities are not able to reach. Like, what are the barriers that are keeping communities from actually getting access, and what will be most beneficial? So when you talk to the heads of a number of the agencies right now, as they're thinking about their grant programs, they're also thinking about the technical assistance that will be needed to help people compete for those grants, that will make sure that communities who have historically been ignored or have not had the ability to be successful in those grant processes can be successful by helping them write the kinds of applications that are appropriate. Or for example, in a couple of weeks ago, the EPA administrator was in Detroit again, working with a community that had been subject to repeat flooding that occurred. And I know I had been there several months ago, and what they talked about there was that the rules that govern when you get funding for FEMA disaster relief don't make sense for their community. So there you have a whole community full of folks who, all of whom have basements that have been expanded so that they're using for bedrooms and rooms that they kind of recreate in. And often there are things that forbid basements from being receiving funding from flooding. So just that sort of information is helpful to then go back to the agencies to make adjustments on how those programs are approached. And I would say all of those things are happening right now. I mean, we are kind of working, trying to integrate as much of that as possible into the work that is going forward.
Okay. Chair Rouse, I'm going to come back to you. I remember when you were confirmed for this role, you said that your focus would be on those who had been left behind. We've obviously had a slew of policies and packages that attempt to address inequality in our country, but I'm wondering what you think the next priority should be.
We still have work to be done. My focus really is on helping to build a strong economy that works for everyone. And I will say that there's still many components of the president's economic policy that we still need to be working on, fighting for, and that we still need to see enacted into law. So I wouldn't say my priorities have changed. I think we still need to be making investments in children, in families, in individuals. We have physical infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure laws, so important. And that was it was a historic piece of legislation that's going to make a big difference. But we know there's a lot of work to be done, as Chair Mallory is pointing out. Climate change is an existential threat, and there are many investments there that we need to be making to make the transition to clean energy, which I will say this is an economic issue as well. So it's hard to say that what's next. It's been a very ambitious year. This president has passed more pieces of legislation, more executive orders, made more regulatory changes than almost any president, I think, in modern history. But we know there's still more work to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. Fair enough. Chair Mallory, I'm going to come back to you because the CEQ just released its pilot of the climate and economic justice screening tool. I want to talk a little bit about that, but I mean, start by explaining what that tool is. And then if you can talk about how everyday people or community leaders can give feedback on this tool, how is it going to help frontline communities?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And so this is another one of those features that was a core element of what the president campaigned on, and from one of the early executive orders identified as being an important feature. One of the things that as you can hear in the conversation, that we're focused on is recognizing that there are communities that have been underinvested in, that there are communities that have not received the benefits from federal programs or from other actions that the federal government has undertaken. And we want to basically address that. And so the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool is created as a tool to help in that. What it is a mapping tool. And we used basically key information that is actually associated with some of the programs that are under development now as part of our Justice 40 program, that look at communities that are at higher risk for climate change impacts, communities where there are higher health burdens, communities that during housing crises have suffered more. And so we've built in all of these factors that will allow us to create a map to identify the communities that will be kind of highest priority as we think about the investments going forward, both under our Justice 40 program, but also, for example, under the bipartisan infrastructure law or other funding. And what it does is it says across the federal government, we're asking each of the agencies to look at the communities that end up on this map and to look at their programs and how they can make sure that the folks that are in those communities are receiving the benefits of whatever the program is that is under consideration.
Okay, if I can briefly just follow up on that one, because I want to ask, I mean, what can you say? There was some criticism about the agency's decision to leave race out of this tool, like explicitly. Is that something that the agency plans to address or change, or what can you say about why that choice was made?
I mean, I think, as I said, what we're really focused on here is places where there's been underinvestment. And so we identified things that show that. So you see the underinvestment when you look at the poverty rate in the area. You see the underinvestment when you look at the places that where there are high health burdens. And so those are the indicators that we use that are tied directly to the programs and the investments that we're making as a way to tell us whether this is the right place to be. And I think that you would see, if you look at what the racial makeup of those communities are, it's very high. It's a very high percentage of folks of color. And so it's not as if we are missing the people because we are using these factors that are tied to our program. But we really do believe that it's the better way to get at identifying who the disadvantaged communities are.
Okay. Well, thank you for that clarification. Chair Rouse, I want to come to you. You brought up inflation earlier. I know that's on a lot of people's minds. What is the president or the administration's message for people who are feeling hard hit by these rising prices? And really, what tools can the administration use? What will you use? How does the president plan to address inflation on Tuesday?
Well, I'm not going to speak to what's in the State of the Union on Tuesday, but I can step back. So, the president comes from a modest family. He understands completely the impact of the current inflation on households, on families, on individuals. I think it's important to recognize that this is a pandemic economy, that we are not alone in the inflation, that it's really the fact that our country, our government came to the aid of families and households, helped them get through so they had the resources to pay the rent, buy food, buy other goods in particular. And our supply chains weren't there to handle the solid demand. So the inflation has resulted from this mismatch of supply and demand. It was a kind of insurance policy. It was the right thing to do. And we very much anticipate and hope that this inflationary period will pass and that it won't become entrenched. That said, that it's really the Federal Reserve is in their mandate to maintain stable prices and full employment. And so Chair Powell, the acting Chair Powell, has signaled that they are prepared and willing to start taking action, and they actually already have, using one tool in their toolkit. But they are watching the data, and the Russia's invasion of Ukraine is going to make this more challenging, but they are watching that they are trying to help bring inflation under control as we move forward. The president, that said, so the president is not standing by. Again, he recognizes that this is a challenge, and his job, he feels for the American people, especially those that, middle-class families that are feeling the pinch. And so he's focused on, one, a lot of this is tied to the pandemic. So he's focused on helping us to manage through what remains of this pandemic in a way that maintains economic activity. And I think we'll be hearing more about next steps in the next week or two. Two, he has been focused on trying to more fully bolster the supply chains, because that's where some of the inflation is coming about. We've had actually record amounts of imports over the past year as we've bought goods from abroad because we did have the means to do so. But he's looking for ways that we can do that better. He's had a full-on focus on making sure our ports are running efficiently, finding ways to train and get more truckers on the road, even focused on finding ways to help people get back to work, because part of the supply challenge is that people need to get back into the workforce. We've had one of the fastest gains in employment recovery over this downturn. The recovery has been much faster than prior downturns. However, we're still not back. So how can we help other people get back? Finally, as part of his economic strategy, this doesn't address prices today, but it will help going forward, is his focus on increasing competition in our marketplace, because we know that where there's market concentration, prices tend to be elevated. We have less innovation. If you've got concentration in labor markets, workers aren't getting their fair share. And I'm just going to also put in another plug for many of the packages and parts of Build Back Better also help to address economic capacity. That is making sure that our economy is running just as big and as full as it can, which is another way of addressing prices going forward. So he is very focused on this, recognizes that this is painful for families, but is trying to do what he can as well.
Well, listen, Chair Rouse, you really kind of brought it back full circle there. But as we close, lastly, I would like to ask a couple of things. One, what would you each say are the administration's biggest accomplishments so far? And then just on a personal note, if you could share in your past year or so of the administration, how you really have brought your lived experience to the work that you are doing into the policies that are impacting so many Americans. Chair Rouse, I'll start with you, and then Chair Mallory, I'll give you the last word on this.
Sure. I would say the president's greatest accomplishment has been how he has managed this pandemic, which means how he has managed the economic recovery as well. So the American Rescue Plan, which obviously provided resources for families to get through, was also the undergirding of the deployment of the vaccines, the purchasing of therapeutics. So it continues helping to ensure states and local governments had the resources to ensure schools could open more safely this fall. And all of that has really propelled our economy over this past year. And I would say that really is the greatest accomplishment. Yes, we have inflation, and I'm not dismissing that. I don't want to minimize that pain, but I want to ask us all what it would have looked like had he not come into office and taking these actions. When he came into office, the economy was growing at only about 50,000, 60,000 jobs a month. The average while he's been in office has been over 400,000. So this recovery has been much faster. Household balance sheets, as I understand, people's wallets are feeling pinched, but they are in better shape than it would have been had we not taken the actions we needed to take. So as a result, our economy is in, I don't want to say good shape, but it's in strong shape to weather what is going to come next, because we don't know what this year is going to bring. We don't know future variants. We don't know what this Russian invasion will bring. And we know we need to bring inflation under control. But our economy is in good shape, and that is due to the president's actions. I would say that's his greatest accomplishment. In terms of my own personal experiences, what I brought to this role, I would say that I think it's really important, and I have encouraged my team, and as we think about different policies, is to consider many voices and to look at the impact of a policy from different perspectives, and to really ask ourselves, is this going to make the world a better place, or at least the economy a better place for all Americans, especially for communities of color? Or is it just going to make the rich richer and the poor, maybe a little bit better off? So I would say it's really bringing the widening the aperture as we consider the impact of different policies as we debate them.
And I will say, so first on the accomplishment, I mean, I do feel like the president has been extraordinarily successful on a number of things, but one of the things in my mind that has worked so well is that he's put in place like the pillars that I think really are going to make such a big difference as we move forward into this next year. In the first year in my area, for example, of getting in place the frameworks that are going to make dealing with environmental justice and environmental problems relating to communities much easier to do, because we have the ability and we have the approaches that we can use to do that. The passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, again, which is bringing funding to some of the most critical issues that we have faced as a country, and is enabling us now to think about how we can deploy those in a way that will really make a difference in communities, as well as deal with making progress in our on climate change and other environmental problems. So I feel like the success of the year was just that immediately came in with a game plan that I think we followed through on in an incredible way that has allowed us to really be in a position to really make some progress that are going to have on the ground, broader on the ground impacts in people's lives, in climate, in justice, and in making sure that the economy gets strong because we have jobs. So those to me are like important elements of the success of the administration. And then I would say personally, I mean, I feel like I am in this position at this moment when we have a president and a vice president who are focused on that combination of environment and justice and inequity in a way that really taps into my experience and what I've done over the course of my professional life, and then my own personal kind of background. And I think being able to be at the table in those conversations over the course of this year has been both powerful and I think impactful.
Well, absolutely. The work continues, and I will let both of you get back to it, but thank you so much for stopping by the 19th to share some of your insights about the administration and to really kind of give us some food for thought as we go into next Tuesday, when I know we'll all be paying attention to what the president has to say at the State of the Union. So thank you so much. Thank you for your leadership, and thanks for being here today.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Mallory and Chair Rouse, for your time and for this fantastic conversation. And thank you all for watching. Remember, Black history is American history, and every day is a great day to learn more about our country's fuller story. If you're not a member yet, you can show your support today by joining at 19thnews.org/membership. We look forward to welcoming you to the 19th family. You can read our journalism online, sign up for our free newsletter, and join us at our next event.